So today, like every Sunday, I got the two Sunday papers. The Sunday Times, which is an Irish edition of that British paper, the Times, and I also got the Sunday Independent, which is an independent news and media publication under the broad stable of Dennis O'Brien. I get both of them mainly from my parents, but also, funnily enough, I find that the Sunday papers are a good bit out of the box, somewhat more than the weekday papers, particularly the Irish Times, which is just establishment propaganda now. The Irish Times is just race baiting, is just celebrating everything Varadkar says and does, and it's become unreadable, and it's a great shame. I remember when the Irish Times was actually really good, and when you could rely upon the Irish Times for its genuine positive diversity and for its objectiveness, but that's the way it is. But I got today's Sunday Independent, and I always read in the Sunday Independent Jean Kerrigan, and I always read Owen Harris in the Sunday Independent. Doesn't mean I agree with either of them on everything they come out with, but nobody agrees with anybody else on everything. That's not the issue. In a previous video, I was talking about Gay Byrne, and one of the things that I should have said about Gay Byrne was that Gay had an absolute visceral hatred of fanaticism. That actually is something that he doesn't get enough praise for retrospectively and posthumously. Gay hated fanaticism. Gay's whole instinct was towards the centre ground, towards being moderate, towards negotiating things. Gay was a Republican in a good sense, in that he believed in the rule of law, and he believed in maintaining, a civilized state. He was a Democrat as well. Okay, Gay wasn't a perfect broadcaster by any means, but he was a more substantial individual than Ryan Tubridy, than any of them on RTE at the moment. Gay hated fanaticism. Gay hated extremism. And he did an awful lot for this country in creating a tone on the Late Late Show and on his radio show, which was moderate, which was centre ground, which was not extremist, which was not fanatical. And, that's how you avoid extremism and fanaticism. You have to accept that people will disagree with you on certain things, but then you don't worry about that. You go and hunt the common ground that they have with you. And Owen Harris has always been a strong critic of RTE. He was a producer in RTE television. He's a fluent Irish speaker in the early days of RTE. I'd criticise him ever so slightly in today's article in the Sunday Independent because he makes the lazy mistake of lumping T.G. Cahir editorially in with RTE. T.G. Cahir is not part of RTE. We've had this conversation before, but that's a small transgression. But I want to read I'm going to read out now, I have the paper in front of me, I'm going to read out a lot of his article today on page 27 of the Sunday Independent, today, the 29th of November 2020. So I'll begin. RTE's monopoly on national memory is only matched by its power to coerce print media. Last week, faced by a blatant breach of COVID regulations, the print media ran for cover rather than antagonise Montrose. No politician or political columnist called on Managing Director of RTE News, John Williams, to consider his position after such a blatant COVID breach, following a far from impromptu bash with invitations and balloons. As soon as the story broke, presenters Brian Dobson, David McCullough, Miriam O'Callaghan and Eileen Dunn came out swiftly offering apologies. But the Director-General did not come forward to be accountable to the licence fee payers who fund RTE to the tune of €200 million annually. That was bad, but far worse was the way the politicians and print media either stayed silent or rallied to RTE's defence. The sole government politician to take a critical stand that weekend was Niamh Smith of Fianna Fáil, speaking to the Sunday Independent. The print media was also either equally silent or cravenly rallied to RTE. Last weekend saw a pathetic parade of modestly paid journalists in print media rallying to the rescue of highly paid peers in RTE. Why? Because print journalists need broadcasting profile and they wanted to keep their seats warm in Montrose. Cross the Montrose moguls and you find yourself effectively banned from RTE current affairs programmes, like me. But on the plus side, it means I am now one of the few print journalists who you can trust to speak his mind about RTE. On the Friday the story broke, the Taoiseach said the RTE breach was very disappointing and left the door ajar for more. But last weekend, as print journalists rushed to reassure RTE, politicians realised they would get no support for RTE sanctions. Listening to the lick-spittle reactions of panellists to RTE radio and TV panels over the weekend, politicians would have been under no illusion that the heavy media wagons were circling around RTE. Not one columnist called for serious sanctions or even a salary docking. Here are some of the ingratiating quotes. "We need to have a sense of proportion about the RTE gathering," or "We all make mistakes, we all make slip-ups. There is no need for a public flogging." Presumably this chilling effect prompted the Taoiseach to offer RTE absolution last Monday, saying, "Protecting its collegiate nature is best achieved in this particular case by taking no further steps in this matter." Later in the day, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Tony Holohan, a Late Show favourite, suddenly called for an end to victim blaming on breaches of public health guidelines. In letting RTE off the hook, the Taoiseach and Tony Holohan seemed to be undermining their own public health message. In fairness to politicians, at the end of the week, Patrick O'Donovan of Fine Gael echoed the concerns of Niamh Smith of Fianna Fáil. He made two critical points on Today with Gay Byrne. First, he pointed out the difference between Golfgate and RTE Gate was the first was during level 2 and the second was in level 5. Referring to the RTE photo of John Williams with his arms around the staff members, he ruefully remarked to Claire Byrne, "But if it was me that was standing in that picture, you'd be asking me, Claire, are you going to resign? That's the difference." That is indeed the difference. But now that RTE knows it can get away with anything, expect its abuse of its virtual monopoly to get worse. Well done, Owen Harris. So sometimes, even in the mainstream media, we have people who are more committed to being honest. But this is not saying anything that all of us out here on Altland haven't been saying really since March. What Golfgate and what RTE Gate have in common is that it shows that the people involved know that COVID-19 is a scam and they're not worried about the consequences of it. And furthermore, we may remember RTE in the Irish Times talking about the far right. The far right. And how the far right had a protest outside the Custom House around August of this year. Remember? And they all met, about well over 1,000 people met outside the Custom House. Nobody socially distanced, nobody wore masks. It might be interesting to find out how many of those have now become critically ill with COVID-19. Could we get an answer to that one? Because all of those people who went to that protest, I was actually asked would I like to speak at it. I decided not to because I don't go to these things. My protest is not wearing a mask in the shops. That's good enough for me. But there were speakers there. There was, I think Dolores Cahill was there. There were others there. Have they become sick? No. The answer is obviously no. So what they're doing in their own way is the same as what Golfgate did and what RTE Gate did, except they're not hypocrites. That's the difference. That's the cardinal, fundamental, all-pervasive difference. It's a difference at me. I don't wear a mask, I don't socially distance, but I've never, what Harris could have gone a bit further in that. I mean, what he wrote today is excellent. What he wrote today is superb. I hope people share my video. I hope people quote him. It was absolutely, here we have a mainstream journalist in the biggest circulation Sunday newspaper in Ireland, the Sunday Independent, calling them out. But he didn't go quite far enough and say that what RTE and the golfers are doing is making a positive mockery of all of those poor people in this country who couldn't go to funerals, couldn't go to hospital, had appointments cancelled, couldn't meet family and friends, weren't able to sit with a dying loved one. They are making a mockery of those people. A mockery of them. Harris could have gone slightly further by saying that, but sure, we've done that out here in the alt scene. And this is all pointing towards the direction of how successful the Irish alt media has been. How much the Irish alt media has achieved. Much more than in any other English-speaking country. The Irish alt media here has really, really, really broken through the whole matrix of this. And they're terrified. And it leads on to something else here. We must remember that those lying, hypocritical bullies in RTE... Oh yeah, Harris should have said something else. He said RTE have been spreading fear-mongering since March of this year, telling people, first of all, a lie that was mandatory to wear masks without explaining to people that they were legally written in exemptions which are not enforceable anyway. RTE never told anybody about the exemptions from wearing a mask. A mandatory mask. It's like what Regina Doherty said, mandatory but not compulsory. Bloody sure. But Harris could have gone that step further, and said, look, RTE have been fear-mongering more than anyone else. Even the goddamn Irish Times RTE have been worse than them. Fear-mongering non-stop about COVID-19. And what that little hoolie conducted by John Williams and all of them proves that they know they're liars. They know they're telling lies. But sure, I told you that. Again, we have this situation where the up media is ahead of them. And we are ahead of them. I pulled up RTE on two things. When they said that Varadkar had made an unconditional apology in relation to smearing the whistleblowing doctors in Waterford, I watched to see what RTE was actually saying and what Varadkar had said. Varadkar had not apologised. He said, I apologise if it seems. That's not an apology. And a good journalist would have gone after him further for that. Varadkar is a criminal. He admitted in the White House to the fact that he fiddled around when he was a minister in government with the planning process down, I think, in Clare. And now he's also admitted in the Dáil to having, fiddled with a selection process about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And now, the latest that's coming out with Varadkar is that he instructed the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, who has not got 2 brain cells between her. Helen McEntee only got into the Dáil because her father committed suicide. She wrote in on pity points. He instructed McEntee to choose one person for the position of a Supreme Court judge. And others had sought it. Other members of the judiciary had sought it. The only person who was considered by McEntee was the one person who had not actually served as a judge. This is why you need a republic with checks and balances against monsters like this. And now McEntee is beginning to get a little bit of sympathy and pity online. She deserves nothing. She doesn't deserve the slightest modicum of sympathy or pity. Now, it's not in relation to the fact that her father killed himself. It's in relation to the fact that Varadkar is now very visibly, in his own crass and clumsy way, throwing McEntee under the bus. Well, she shouldn't let him. She should walk away. She should do what Martin should have done. Walk away. You're dealing with a psychopath here, walk away. He's turning abusive on you because he turns abusive on everyone. So, again, we see the foul influence of Varadkar and how Varadkar has, acted with total contempt for long-established conventions in relation to judicial selection in Ireland. But that's Fine Gael. Fine Gael don't respect our republic. They don't respect the checks and balances in place. Okay, there are 2 types of checks and balances. There are checks and balances that are explicitly stated in the Constitution. But then there are the conventions. And conventions are in their own way almost as important as checks and balances. Okay, conventions are not written down in the Constitution. But the convention was, for example, that a judge for the Court of Appeal or Supreme Court would be selected out of the existing judiciary in the High Court. The way that judicial selections work is that judges go into the High Court from having nearly always been senior counsel who practiced in the High Court. And in more recent years, the first example being Mr. Justice Peart. They're chosen from solicitors who also practiced in the High Court. It's virtually unheard of for High Court judges to be appointed from the lower ranks of the Circuit Court or the District Court. The judges who go into the District Court and Circuit Court are usually, in some instances, barristers, more often than not these days, solicitors who practiced at District and Circuit Court level. So there's quite a clear gulf between selections into the District and Circuit Court on the one hand, and then selections to the High Court, Court of Appeal, and Supreme Court on the other. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it works. The convention is such that the judges who are chosen for the High Court and then beyond the High Court were barristers usually and solicitors who practiced in the High Court, and they know the considerable distinction between High Court procedure and the more summary court procedures. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not written down in law, and Fine Gael have trampled all over it. Trampled all over it. Is the Irish Times and RTE going after Varadkar over this? No, of course they're not. They haven't. I speculate ruefully about what it would take for them to actually criticise Varadkar substantially. What does he have to do? Does he have to murder somebody live on TV? What does Varadkar have to do for them to say a bad word against him? What is this hold that Varadkar has over them? From the moment Varadkar became Taoiseach, I said he's a dud. The socks and Downing Street and all this carry-on he went on with. I just said, I mean, you look back at my social media, check my Facebook when I'm not in jail, which I am at the moment. Many thanks to my very good friends who've been posting my material. Thank you. It's not as if people weren't calling Varadkar out on his profound inadequacy from the start. Because Varadkar gave a speech in Downing Street saying it was just like being in Love Actually. And that was cringe-making, but it was more than that. It showed a lack of brakes. Okay, Varadkar's a psychopath. Okay, an awful lot of politicians and business leaders and these commercial heads are psychopaths. Varadkar is most certainly not the first leading politician to be a psychopath. We accept that. But Varadkar has other problems as well, in that he seems to be quite stupid. There seems to be a low IQ there. Okay, he passed as a doctor. Okay, the Gay Byrne lobby and RTE all think that anybody who's called a doctor immediately should get a free pass. That's another pathology in RTE, but it's a much older one. That academics, people with PhDs, like that crooked imbecile Eoghan Joseph, should be given a free pass. You would see this on RTE, particularly on the Gay Byrne Late Late Show. People would come on to talk about James Joyce, and you would get these lecturers in some university just reading out from a paper that they'd written. And people aren't tuning in for that. I remember many years ago meeting an academic, very nice man, Terence Brown, who had written the introduction to the Penguin edition of Dubliners by James Joyce. Oh, Terence Brown, I said, you wrote the introduction to that. And he was able to talk fluently and so interestingly about James Joyce and other literature. You know, you don't get him going on RTE. People like that. So, while there's a lot of criticism of PhDs, I went to university myself. I have a BA degree in English and History, I have a master's degree in Literature and Philosophy, I have another master's degree in Irish Film and Theatre Studies. I also did the HDip in Ed as a secondary teacher. I benefited hugely from university. I enjoyed it a lot. I reserve the right to do a PhD. I think I would do a PhD on how Fine Gael is a seditious influence in the state. That would be a good PhD. And I'm not joking about that. It occurred to me that would be a PhD. That Fine Gael, since 2011, has been a seditious influence in this state. Notwithstanding even the NGOs. But the NGOs, Fine Gael really boosted the NGO lobby when they took office. You know, I have to do a serious video. I mean, the video I'm doing now is just me talking into a mic, extempore. Okay, I read that bit of the article, but other than that, I'm just talking. But, you know, I have a soundproofed room here where I have a studio mic. You know, I can do graphics and those kind of things, but they take a king's eternity to do. And they're very painstaking to do graphics and to do dubbing over that. I've done it. I did it with that Johnny Bravo video I did a while ago of your man in Dolan Supermarket. But, you know, that takes ages to actually construct the animation and those kind of things. I use two programs. I use PowerPoint, and I use my video editing and final rendition software is Premiere Elements. Really, really good video editing program and easy to use. Really, it's Adobe at its best, actually, because Adobe can be quite hard to use. And also Adobe crashes your computer because there's such big software. I'm going to have to get a Mac. Talk about condescending. I'm going to talk about cheapening myself by getting a Mac. But, you know, doing those videos with graphics and PowerPoint is great for crude motions, things shooting in and shooting out or going across the screen up and down. PowerPoint's your only man for that. And what you do is you create your image with Photoshop, and you create a transparent image with Photoshop. You then import it into PowerPoint. You create a green screen background in PowerPoint. You create the motion in PowerPoint, moving in or out or whatever. Then you save. People don't realize this about PowerPoint. You can save PowerPoint files in video file format. a lot of the people who do these PowerPoint presentations don't realise that. In terms of making short, crude graphic videos, titles, that kind of thing, PowerPoint is brilliant. It's like a lump hammer. It's crude, but it's really, it's quick, it's useful, it's simple to do those kind of things. You save it with a green screen background. You then import it into your video software, the Premiere Elements, and you do cancel green. So that's how you bring your graphics in from PowerPoint into a final product in your animation video. I've digressed. I also avoided using bad language in this video because we're dealing with a serious newspaper, the Sunday Independent, a serious journalist, Owen Harris, and I want people to hear this because what Harris has in the newspaper today is frankly devastating. Absolutely frankly devastating. He's written about Varadkar as well. You know how Varadkar has no boundaries, how he's been undermining Micheál Martin. Varadkar undermines Micheál Martin for a reason. He undermines him because Martin lets him. But this gets back to our old rule of psychopaths. The only way you deal with a psychopath is that you don't.